Please tell me about your childhood and your family background, your upbringing, and your intellectual development.
Right, I was born on the 7th of August 1959, and since quite a few Indians are interested in astrology, you do with it what you want, but the data are that I was born at 10 minutes past noon in Leuven, Belgium, which has Greenwich Mean Time +1, okay? It's 4 degrees, 40 minutes, I think, east of Greenwich, and it's almost 51 degrees north, all right? So now you can make my horoscope and predict my future. Me, I am not going to tell about my future, I don't know. But as for my past, let's start at the beginning. So I was born in Leuven, Belgium. This is a university town, a little town really, somewhat east of Brussels. And it's a very peaceful place. Nothing ever happens there, I'd say. And in my youth, certainly nothing ever happened. My parents were extremely regular people, Catholic, which at that time was quite usual in my country. And so my father was a civil servant. He never ever changed a job in his life. He never did any monetary negotiations. You know, the pay scale was completely fixed. The career was very predictable. So, you know, the good thing about it was that he could concentrate on other things. When he came home, his work was really done. Then we were not rich, not poor. We had no car, no telephone. In those days, you could still raise a family on a single salary. My mother did not work. She stopped working as a school teacher after she got married. And so that was the situation, sociologically speaking. Then I was the second of 5, one elder sister, 4 boys, that is to say, me was the eldest, and then 3 younger siblings. Then, which gives me a special sympathy for firstborn who are girls. This is the case with Ila, the daughter of Manu. You see the patriarch Manu in India. He had one daughter and then a number of sons. And so, you know, normally she should have inherited the throne, but because she was only a girl, she couldn't. And so her younger brother, Ikshwaku, who was in the same position as me, he inherited the throne. He started the solar dynasty. Anyway, so that's it, you know, and me, I could concentrate on schoolwork. I was always very intellectually interested. Since, I think, even before primary school, I always listened to the news intently. Then my father at the time was a conservative Catholic, and quite actively so. So we had a number of these periodicals catering to that particular ideological audience. And the situation at that time is quite interesting, though it is completely far away from the Hindu world, is that the Catholic Church was starting to collapse. You know, there had been a Second Vatican Council, you know, a meeting of all the cardinals, and they changed some of the church policies, some of the church positions, which is very unusual. The Catholic Church was always known for being conservative, being an establishment that never changed. And so in the Second Vatican Council, they started changing a lot of things. And so it was said jocularly that before the council, the only thing that ever changed in the church was bread into flesh, namely the body of Christ, and wine into blood, the blood of Christ. You see, that's in a sacrament called the transubstantiation. So you see, people started doubting about that. Would you believe that the wine that the priest drinks at a certain time in the Eucharist, that really changes into the blood of Christ? You see, that's something Catholics are supposed to believe, but you see, modern people have a hard time believing that. So that was effectively changing. And so people used to say jocularly that in the before the council, the only thing that changed in the church was wine into blood. And afterwards, the only thing that didn't change was wine into blood. Otherwise, everything was up for review. Now, a number of Catholics saw the ground slipping away from under them. And so they started fighting this tendency, unsuccessfully. But so my father was part of that tendency. So I read all this stuff, or from as soon as I could read, I was reading that. And much other literature, Flemish novels, and whatever I could lay my hands on. In those days there was no internet and so on, so the books had to be physically available. But so I was a very curious kid. Then around at 12 I started studying Latin, which to me was very important. Latin historically had the same role in Europe as Sanskrit has in India. And, I always felt for that. Like at age 15, 16, like many young boys, I wasn't very interested in school. And so I always made sure to just pass my exams, but not do anything more for them. So I slipped through with 55%, except for Latin. Latin translation, top of the class, without doing anything for it. So I had this natural talent, and people who believe in reincarnation have repeatedly told me, you must have been a priest or something in a past life, someone who used Latin always, and so you have natural talent for it. Who knows? But so, that was the sort of classical education, and I swore by that, and I still do. You see, the fact that now this is all being, is becoming less and less and less and less, is a very deplorable evolution. And the same thing has happened in India in the 20th century, when Sanskrit lost a lot of ground. Now here and there, they're trying to revive it. But so in Europe, that evolution was, that took place, and that's a great pity. And in Europe, I don't think it will be reversed. You see, Latin is dying. Even in the church, you see, the present Pope, a few years ago, has decreed that Latin is no longer the official language of the Vatican. You see, that was like the last bastion. So that is really on the way out, whereas Sanskrit has a future. Okay, anyway, I'm deviating from your question. So, you see, in spite of the fact that I was seriously Catholic, I was also singing in the church choir. like Credo in unum Deum, Patrem omnipotentem, factorem caeli et terrae, visibilium omnium et invisibilium. You know, that type of Latin plain chant, Gregorian. Anyway, in spite of that, at age 14, 15, I seriously started doubting all that. And fairly typical for that time, I stopped going to church on Sunday. And so there are very many families across my country where the same thing happened. You know, some rebellious kid, usually the eldest son, which describes me, among others, just rejected the faith. And then usually other kids followed. Very often the parents also followed. You see, once they started seeing that there is an alternative to being a believer, namely not being a believer, that's what they started doing. And then when enough people started doing that, then all the conformists, those who used to go to church only because everyone went, they started staying away because everybody started staying away. You know, in the beginning of my life, my country was something of a Catholic frontline state. You know, there was Calvinist Holland, Anglican England, Lutheran Germany, and then secular Masonic France. You know, those are the surrounding countries. And so we were, just like Ireland, for example, or like Quebec in Canada, we were a Catholic frontline state. And around 1970, that very much eroded and ultimately collapsed. You can see it nowadays with the retreat in the number of church rituals. You see, in my young days, many couples still had their children baptized only to please their parents. They didn't believe anymore in it, but they still did it under influence. The present generation is past that stage. So number of baptisms is collapsing. Number of church weddings is collapsing. Now it has reached the generation that, you know, is dying. So the number of church funerals is collapsing. In Brussels now, most of the burials are by Muslims, by Muslim immigrants. They get buried, though often the corpse is then flown over to the motherland to be buried there. But so the native population mostly is not Christian anymore, and typically they have shifted from burial to cremation. So there you see now most dead people get cremated. So this church presence is, well, let's say, not what it used to be. And of course, you read quite a few publications here and there, at least if you follow it. It's not in the mainstream media, that say that there is a revival of religion and like just now I read one that said atheism is more in crisis than Catholicism. Now that's not really true. The very conscious militant atheism, that is not what it used to be because it has no enemy anymore. When the church was still strong, those who went outside the church, they had to constantly assert their unbelief. And so atheism at that time was quite militant. Now that's also gone. But that's gone precisely because Christianity is gone. So I agree with those people in my country who say that secularization, in the West at least, I'm here not speaking of India, is an ongoing evolution and that is still not showing any sign of stopping. You see, their religion, in the sense of organized religion, is collapsing until very little will stay of it, will remain. So, you know, I was just part of that general evolution, but a very articulate part, if I may say. So I outgrew Christianity. Then, you know, did something come in its place? Well, you see, as the Catholic philosopher G.K. Chesterton said, you see, if you stop believing in Christ, you will not start believing in nothing, no, you will believe anything. And I must say that in my life, that proved true to some extent, because the next years, you know, as an adolescent, I was fairly enthusiastic for Marxism, which was also fairly fashionable at the time. But, you know, intermittently, because I was also interested in all kinds of spiritual movements. You know, I was reading up about astrology, about Kabbalah, and so on. All that, you know, came to fill the void that had been left behind by my, apostasy from Christianity. You see, apostasy from Christianity happened on a large scale, largely because of the democratization of education. You see, as soon as people started thinking and questioning, then they realized that the basic defining dogmas of Christianity cannot stand scrutiny. You see, as a Christian, you're supposed to believe that mankind has fallen, is sinful. That much is sensible. You know, to say that humanity is imperfect, all right. Who could quarrel with that? But then you also have to believe that because of sinfulness, mortality started. That's already harder. Like animals are all mortal. They die, yet can you say that an animal sins? You see, a mouse being eaten by a cat, you know, is not guilty of anything, is not being punished for anything, it has done nothing wrong. The cat eating the mouse is killing. As a human being, it would be guilty of murder, but the cat is quite innocent. The cat is not sinning, nevertheless it is mortal. And so this is a silly dogma to link mortality with sinfulness. Then this sinfulness, fortunately, can be helped. Namely, God has sent his Son, Jesus, to save us from sin. And so, how did he do it? Well, after he was born from a virgin, which is also something hard to believe. But then, you see, he died on the cross and he was resurrected. Probably in the year 33. Now, the level of sinfulness in humanity has not appreciably changed in the year 33. I think humanity is just as sinful as it used to be. So, I mean, there is really no sign of this Jesus changing anything. Then, moreover, you see, it is said by Christians that Jesus conquered death, right? Because, you know, by rising from the dead, he had definitively changed the age-old phenomenon that all mortal beings die. Well, by definition. So suddenly death was not something irreversible anymore. Well, that's very interesting, but the thing about people who are not dead is that you can run into them sometime. Maybe it's difficult to get to talk to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, for example. He has security personnel around him and so on. He doesn't talk to ordinary mortals like you and me. But nevertheless, in principle, it is possible. Whereas with Jesus, it is more difficult. Has anyone ever here met Jesus in person? Because the missionaries here go around saying, oh, Jesus saves, Jesus is in my heart. Well, I don't think anybody has ever met Jesus, and that's no matter. You see, that's what happens with people who are dead. You dead people you won't encounter anymore. You may see their statue on the square, but you don't meet them anymore. And that's the same with Jesus. Why? Because, you see, according to the church itself, Jesus did the same thing as all other people who die, namely he disappeared. And then in the Acts of the Apostle, this is all sort of embellished by saying that he rose to the sky. But at any rate, he disappeared just like dying people do. So there is really no sense in which you can say Jesus has conquered death. He has done the same thing as all people who die. And so if you start thinking about it, well, you can't sustain this belief. There are nice things in Christianity, and there's absolutely great Christian art. You come to my country and look, at the cathedrals and so on. It's great, but nevertheless, the heart, the center of it, can't stand scrutiny. So, you can have religion, you can have awe for the sacred, and you can, write music in the sphere of that doctrine and paint paintings and stuff. You have the whole Christian culture, and yet, the core of it has to go. You can't believe it anymore. And so that is what happened. You see, here it's a long explanation to sort of make credible that people in droves left Christianity. And so did I. So what came after was a passing phase, But at any rate, there I got the interest in, well, the higher things, the bigger questions. I remember at, I think, 17, we were a group of teenagers talking about, the big questions and what we were going to do in life and what was worth living for and so on. And so apparently I must have given the impression of taking all this very seriously, because when we parted company, this friend, this girl, she said, well, I hope you find the truth. So, okay, then I decided, yeah, the truth, maybe that's what I should go for. So that's how I ended up with Hinduism ultimately. So I went to study, first, Oriental studies in general. The first thing I started studying was Chinese and Chinese philosophy. And then I saw that maybe, you see, India has something more ultimate to offer, at any rate something I should know. And then I started studying Sanskrit and the Upanishads and everything. And then I also did, for good measure, study of Western philosophy. But so at any rate, by that time I had discovered what I wanted in life. And so I wanted the truth, and that's why I started studying Hindu philosophy. Right? I guess that is what you wanted to know.